Welcome to part two of the transmission video series. Today we're going to be disassembling a ratchet top lid, as they're referred to. This is a transmission top that was used by Harley-Davidson on 4-speed big twin transmissions from 1952, which was the first year they offered a foot shift. And they ran the same cover all the way through early 1979 models. And this is called a ratchet top lid again, because as you would shift the gears, this is going to ratchet through the different gears. As you can see, when I move this, it's like moving your foot shifter, and it moves this shift cam, which puts the transmission into different gears. So this top was part of a transmission that was sent to me for rebuilding. So we're going to go through the process of taking the ratchet top apart and talk about some nuances that we see. This is unscripted, so this is exactly as I took it off the transmission. We'll take it apart, I'll give you my commentary, and we'll go from there. To prepare for doing this, I know that I'm going to need a screwdriver. I know I'm going to need a 7/8 socket, the 2 gaskets I need, along with a lock tab that's missing. And it's always a good idea to have a reference page from the service manual, just in case you want to check a spec or a part. It's always good to have that available. And then on assembly, which we'll do in a separate video, we're going to be using the grease, the Lubriplate 105 grease. So let's go through how do we take this apart. There's 3 screws here that hold on the shift lever. As you can see, one of the screws is missing. Again, not uncommon. So we're going to take these 2 screws off, take the lever off, and then the chrome dust plate will come off. So these screws are not on very tight at all, almost a finger tight. We'll set that aside, pull off the other one. Again, very, very loose. We'll pull that screw off. We'll take off the lever assembly, which should come right off. We'll set that aside. The dust plate will come off. We'll set that aside. And now on the cover here, we have 6 different screws. The top 5 screws thread into the aluminum housing. The screw at the 6 o'clock position goes all the way through, and there's a small nut on the underside. So these top 5 screws should all be the same length. The 6 o'clock position screw will be a little bit shorter. So we're going to take these 5 screws out now. Again, they're not very tight at all. I'm going to loosen them all up first. They're all very loose. And the last one. And I'll simply spin them out by hand. I'm going to leave one of them up on top here to show the difference between the screw at the 6 o'clock position. The other 5 screws I'm going to move aside to our cleaning area. And then the 6 o'clock screw, typically you can just kind of hold the nut on the bottom and loosen the screw. It's very loose again. There's the nut. And this is the screw. And as you can see, it's a little bit shorter than the other 5. So we're going to set these screws aside along with the nut. The Pawl carrier cover will now come right off. Like so. We'll set this aside. And also notice there's no gasket installed here. So there should be a gasket. The gasket is missing from the Pawl carrier itself, as well as it's missing from the cover. No big deal, but it's just another nuance of something that was installed incorrectly at one time. The next we're going to take off is the Pawl carrier itself. Now underneath this Pawl carrier, there's 4 springs. There's 2 larger springs in this area, and there's 2 short springs in this area. And you learn this lesson the first time you ever take one of these apart. You pull this off and you got 4 springs that go flying. And you say, well, I'm never going to do that again. So I've learned that lesson the first time I did it. So now I'm going to be holding my hand over this as I slowly pull this cover off. And you can pull this off by hand. So I'm going to start pulling up on it. As you can see, it's coming off. When I get to the point where I know it's going to come off, I'll cover it and pull it the rest of the way off and let the springs pop out and then turn everything over. So this is your Pawl carrier assembly. We'll set this aside. You have 2 of the Pawls, which are different. You got the 2 Pawl springs, and then you have the 2 larger, what I would call Pawl shifter springs. It's not uncommon to find these larger springs broken in several pieces, but they look pretty good. So I'm going to move these pieces all aside. And then the last thing we have to do is we're going to pull off the Pawl carrier itself, which is this plate. Adapter plate is another word for it. There's 1 screw that holds the adapter plate on right here. So I'm going to pull this screw off. There'll be a lock washer underneath it. Set the camera back down. I'm still learning how to use all this stuff. And I will take out the 1 screw that holds on the adapter plate. And make sure I get the lock washer. So we have the screw and the washer. We'll set that aside. At this point now, the adapter plate should lift right off, and there should be a gasket underneath this adapter plate. So the plate comes off. We'll set that aside. And then here's our gasket. Typically, it just comes right off, just like this. And we're going to be replacing this gasket, so we'll set that aside. So now we have every component removed from the ratchet assembly. Everything's set over here. We're going to throw away the gasket, and we'll be cleaning all of the other components. Now the other thing we're going to do to this transmission top before we clean the whole assembly is the cam follower is missing the lock ring, lock tab. So I'm going to turn this transmission top over and we'll be addressing the cam follower. This is the lock washer that should be underneath the cam follower screw. So we're going to pull this apart. What this cam follower does inside here, which you'll see when I pull it apart, there's a cam follower stud with a point on it, and that point goes in between the recess of the cam drum. And that's what locks it into different gears, first, second, third, neutral, etc. So as you rotate the drum, the cam follower will indent and set itself in these grooves. So we're going to pull this apart and make sure the spring is okay and the cam follower is okay. Seven-eighths ratchet. And it should then turn right off, nice and smooth. When this is off, there should be a spring and actual cam follower itself. So there we go. So we're going to pull off. This is the actual stud or bolt assembly, if you will. The spring is all intact and looks pretty good. And this is your cam follower itself. Notice the point. And that point is what goes into the groove on the shift drum itself, which keeps it locked into a specific gear. So that's it. The whole thing is disassembled. As far as we're going to go today, there's no need at this point to pull apart the shift drum itself. We're going to make sure that the two teeth here, the gear on the drum and the gear on the shift cam here, are timed correctly. There's two timing marks that should be timed. So we're going to make sure that's okay. Everything will be cleaned. New gaskets will be used. And I'll do another video on assembly of all the components after cleaning. So that's Ratchet Top, not Carrot Top, Ratchet Top. And video number 2 is in the bag. Thanks for watching.